Beginning, I think we just go one by one. We go 10-1. Is that good with you?
Yeah, 10-1 is good.
Okay, I've got my list here ready to go.
Yeah.
I'll start things off.
Yeah.
It pains me to say this because this team, who I have in 10th, so the worst out of the worst quality team to have won the Premier League in the last 10 years, is is definitely by far my favorite team to have won the Premier League, just in terms of the guys they had and the way they won it. It's got to be the 2015-16 Leicester City team. I mean, just from a points total perspective, they pale in comparison to some of these Man City and Liverpool teams, even some of these Chelsea teams that won the league. That being said, this was a magnificent team. I get goosebumps still watching clips of Vardy and Mahrez and Shinji Kagawa and just Ranieri in the touchline. I mean, it sometimes still doesn't even feel real that this team won the league, but Wes Morgan captain, you had Kasper Schmeichel, the son of a legend, in goal. Danny Simpson at right back, Danny Drinkwater in midfield, who went on to Chelsea later on. It was just an unbelievable story. However, if you put all these teams in a knockout tournament or a group stage, I don't think this Leicester team beats any of the rest.
No.
So I have them in 10th.
I had the same thing. Yeah, not much more to add. They have, I think, the lowest points per game average out of these teams, 2.13. 81 points. You don't win the league with that these days, do you? So, yeah, I mean, it may be the best achievement given where they came from and the story there. I mean, you won't find a better narrative. And it's certainly something I'll never forget. And it was a fun side. I mean, listen,
Really
Mahrez and Vardy and Okazaki, like, what a team. But I think definitely the worst of the bunch, unfortunately, for them.
Yeah, agreed. This is where things kind of get interesting now.
Yeah, it's hard.
Really hard. I'm struggling to differentiate which team was which. But I've kind of I have a couple words just next to each team to remind me of who they are. In 9th, I've got the 2020-2021 Man City team. This was the COVID year. I believe 86 points was one of the COVID years. 86 points won the league. It was the year, and this is what I had to differentiate them. It was the year that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's Man United finished second. And
that's a good point.
That kind of summed it up for me. Liverpool had a down year. It was the first time, the second year in a row that Leicester had bottled top four. This was West Ham's year. We finished 6th. That should kind of give you a tale of how poor the league was a bit, although I loved that West Ham team. This was the year Man City brought in Ruben Diaz. It was kind of the end of, Kompany was gone at this point. De Bruyne was still doing his thing. It was kind of a league won by committee. They didn't have anyone in particular other than the usual names that really had an unbelievable year like a couple of these other teams did. So I had the 2020-2021 Man City team in 9th.
Yeah, this batch of 3 was very close to differentiate. I had Mourinho's Chelsea.
Okay.
Who, again, from here up, all these teams are really good.
Yeah.
Mourinho's Chelsea was 87 points, 2.29 points per game, only 3 defeats. I mean, again, it's fine margins, but it is a sort of transition period for Chelsea. Terry and Cahill sort of still there. John Terry's still the captain, coming to the end. Ivanovic, Azpilicueta, so a solid base, of course, but still 32 goals conceded. It wasn't Mourinho's best Chelsea team by any means, of course. The first time around, I think, was far better. The midfield, Fabregas, of course, comes in. Matic, Ramirez, Johnny Obi, Mikel. I think Chelsea have seen some better midfields than that, but still solid. And then you've got Oscar, Willian, and Hazard, who had 14 goals that season. So very strong. And, of course, Diego Costa as well, who hit 20 goals. And Drogba was still kicking around. So a good team. I had another Chelsea team slightly higher. But it was tough to pick from here on out. But 87 points, Mourinho's return in 2014-15 are my 9th placed team for this ranking.
Yeah, I'll just add on quickly. They were my team in 8th place.
There you go.
It was a good Chelsea team, a great Chelsea team when they won the league, but I do think the other Chelsea team in this list and the rest of these teams were just significantly better. And it's probably unfair to take into consideration, but I did kind of take into consideration how quickly the wheels fell off the very next year, and how bad Chelsea were. Jose was gone. They had Shakespeare as interim manager, and then The next guy who was brought in, who we'll get to in a little bit. So they were my 8th place team. Who did you have in 8th?
So I had COVID Man City in 8th,
Okay.
who we already kind of spoke about. I also thought, like, if these teams matched up against each other, who would win? I just fancy the Pep teams, in most scenarios.
That's a fair point.
With Jesus and Aguero, Sterling, sort of prime Sterling, Bernardo Silva, De Bruyne, Gundogan, Rodri, Foden. Like, this was sort of the start of the, I would say, Pep's sort of second phase, with Aguero phasing out, and Fernandinho phasing out, Rodri coming in, Foden coming in, sort of the new look midfield. Really solid team. Pretty close to the Chelsea teams, I think. Maybe the worst of the City teams, I guess, but it's pretty slim pickings. But they didn't hit 90 points, so I think that was sort of the decider for me. 86 points puts them 8th on my list.
All right, moving to 7th spot. This is where things get, for me, controversial, interesting. Use whatever word you want. I have last year's Man City team
Interesting.
in 7th spot. Part of this is kind of not maybe it's the reverse of recency bias in the team I have above them. But this Man City team, I mean, they were phenomenal. Phil Foden is the name I have written down next to this team because he was probably the best player in the league, scored that goal on the final day within, I think, 2 minutes against West Ham. That kind of just settled all the nerves because the title did go down to the final day, but, they smashed us. I just think the rest of these teams were that much better. I do. I think there were times last year where I really thought Arsenal were going to win the league, that Liverpool might win the league. And with some of these teams, it was just never in doubt. And I think there really isn't much. I'll explain my 6th place team a bit more as to why I have them 6th, because it's really a toss-up. But I had the 23-24 Man City team.
Okay, yeah, I have them higher. I had Conte's Chelsea here, which, again, a really good team. 93 points, 30 wins, 3 draws, 5 defeats. 33 goals conceded. It was the back three revolution.
Yeah.
It was Marcus Alonso, who scored 6 goals that season. Cahill, Azpilicueta, David Luiz, Victor Moses.
Yeah.
It was a new look sort of team, and Fabregas was great that season. Hazard got 16 goals. Pedro and Willian were great. Diego Costa, Batshuayi off the bench. I compare that squad to the City teams, and I can't put them ahead of them. It'd be a fascinating game. But I just think when you compare the sort of De Bruyne's and Rodri's and Fernandinho's of the world, I hand it to Pep just slightly, but tough to say because it is different eras. But 93 points is solid from that Conte team, who were a one and done, but that was a hell of a season for Chelsea. I think that was maybe the best team I've seen from Chelsea live. In terms of I wasn't really there for the Terry Carvalho sort of years. But yeah, I had them in 7th.
I had them in 6th. I'm partially romanticizing Conte a bit. I just thought he was brilliant. I thought this team was brilliant. I thought, relatively speaking, compared to the rest of the league, they were just so dominant. I mean, they went on a stretch. There are records of, they'll bring up these graphics nowadays of these Liverpool and Man City runs of unbeaten runs. And this Chelsea team's on that list. Like, they're up there with how dominant they were. And I do think, this is me, again, it's a bit of nostalgia, bit of romanticism of just pre-Pep times because he's ruined the game. No, but something like that. I don't disagree with you that I probably give the edge on paper to the Rodris and the Fodens over the Victor Moses and the Fabregas. But I just really like this team, and I loved prime Conte at Chelsea. It was just a match made in heaven.
It was.
So I had them 6th above last year's Man City team.
Okay, 6th, I have the False Nine team, as I've been calling them, for Man City. 2021-2022.
Okay.
Same points total as Conte's Chelsea. Same points per game, so very close. They conceded less goals, which was sort of the deciding factor there, and I have them lower than the other City teams because of the False Nine, to be honest. I think when Haaland comes into the picture, they are that much better, I think. Listen, it's slim pickings. De Bruyne was great that season, 15 goals, 8 assists. Bernardo Silva with 8 goals. Fernandinho in his prime. Gundogan, Rodri's first season, he wasn't quite where he is now. Sterling 13 goals, Foden with 9, Grealish's first season, Mahrez's last season, Jesus still there. This was a really solid team. So yeah, and the defense as well with Ederson, Laporte, Walker, Cancelo was great. Diaz and Stones were great. Zinchenko there. Nathan Ake. They had everything bar the striker, and they still put up 93 points. So pretty impressive stuff. Maybe the league wasn't quite as competitive as it is right now. The last 2 years, I would say. Maybe that's why they're slightly lower for me. But still a hell of a team. So yeah, I've got the false 9-man City team, as I'm calling them, in 6th.
Well, that false 9-man City team, is that I have them in 5th.
Okay.
Was that not the year Gundogan won it for them on the final day? I think it was. 2022.
2022. Yeah, because it wasn't last year.
It wasn't last year.
The year before.
Yeah. I have them. I have them there. That's the note I wrote down. Gundogan final day. And when I'm comparing these teams, it's kind of like something has to distinguish them. And I think the fact it was that close has them slightly lower than some of these other teams. But there really is not much to distinguish. I mean, you kind of touched on all the important points there on the guys they had. The false 9 system, winning it with a false 9 was incredibly impressive. Gundogan is the guy I kind of want to outline from this point. I think he really shined this year. Obviously went on to captain them the next year when they won the treble, which we'll get to inevitably. But he really it's an embarrassment of riches of moments if you're a Man City fan, because that Gundogan moment is brilliant, but it's not even really talked about that much. Like, it should be in the same breath as that Aguero QPR moment. You
think?
Why not? I mean, just because you won,
that was the first
they were
one,
down.
If you isolate both moments, I see what you're saying.
Right, and they were down 2-0 against a better team. I know Villa weren't the Villa they are now, but
they're no slouches.
Coutinho scored. Liverpool thought this is it. Like, Coutinho scoring for Villa against Man City, and they still found a way.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it when it happened. Then Salah scored like a minute later, and he thought he had won it. And then he was looking to the crowd, and they were like, they goes 2-1.
I remember that. That was yes.
This is what I'm saying. There's so many moments that you get caught up.
Great final day. That's a lovely anecdote, because I remember I was in the Everton away end at Arsenal.
Right.
And the mood was awful because Liverpool were winning, and some guy was like, I can't go back. It's like they didn't want to get on the train back. And then we realized City had scored and started cheering, and even the Arsenal fans were like, what is going on? They were like, wait, are Man City winning? We were like, yeah, it's 3-2. So yeah, great moment. The only thing that I'll get onto my 5th place team, I guess. The Foden season of last year, as I've sort of called it. Ahead of this team is because of Haaland. The addition, I mean, it's a very similar team. You just slip Haaland's 27 goals in, and Alvarez too. I mean, that was quite the strike force. And Foden with 19. What you gain in Foden and Haaland, you lose a bit of De Bruyne. So it is sort of fine margins, but with a striker like that, I just had to give them the edge. And it was very close. 91 points versus 93. So the Foden team got less defeats, but less points. So it's like, you could go either way with this argument. But yeah, I had last year's Man City team in 5th.
It's a fair pick. My 4th place team, and this is crazy that this team is in 4th.
Yeah.
I have the treble winners.
Wow.
4th.
Interesting.
And it's only because I just remember these top 3 teams, which we'll get into, having a bit more of a wow factor when I watch them. Like, the Man City team that won the treble was brilliant, obviously. I mean, Rodri scored a great goal in the Champions League final. But I almost think that the teams that didn't win the Champions League were just as good. And I know they didn't get over the hump, but I think the teams were better. And we'll get on to who those teams are. There's 2 Man City teams in particular and a Liverpool team that I think are better than this Man City treble-winning team, which is crazy to say, but I truly think that Man City should have more Champions Leagues than they do. And it was just this team that happened to get over the hump. Because there's a randomness to knockout football. You see it with Madrid all the time, of maybe not always winning when you deserve it. And I think this Man City team deserved to win the Champions League more times than they have. And ironically, the time they did, I think the team wasn't actually as just wow. And I'll get into it when I talk about these next couple teams. But yeah, I mean, controversial, foolish, whatever you want. I have them in fourth.
I didn't. I have. It makes for an interesting discussion. I've got the 18-19 team, which is absurd to say because they got 98 points.
Yep.
Why did I have them there? I don't know. I mean, they're pretty damn good. Are they as good as the? I sort of tried to compare the defenses a little bit. I think the 23-24 treble winner team. And well, I don't want to spoil the rest of my picks, but I think City have had some better defenses than. Although Laporte was great that season, but I just look at like Delph and Danilo. I'm like, you're not getting near the team now,
right?
So I mean, again, it's very fine margins, but that was an argument I sort of tried to implement. Not De Bruyne's best season, but Aguero had a great season that year with 21 goals. Sterling got 17 goals. Sane with 10 goals. That was a great front three. Maybe it's the best one they've had, but we'll get into the comparisons because I've got three more teams to discuss. But yeah, I mean, listen, 2.58 points per game is no slouch. That is quite something. So 98 points. It's hard to put them this low, but I don't know. I think when you introduced Rodri and Haaland, I think they went to a whole new level. Did they play as good football? Maybe not. Maybe that's what you're sort of remembering too. I think you're right.
Yeah.
But I think when you put these teams up against each other, I just think there's some cheat codes in these new Man City teams that I think they can beat anyone, and they did beat everyone in the treble winning season. But yeah, so 18-19 Man City was quite the side. I think they dominated the league that year because it was obviously pre-Liverpool victory. Or did Liverpool come close that year too? I don't remember.
That was 98-97.
That was the 98-97.
Yeah.
So yeah, to get nearly 100 points again is quite something. But top four. I don't know if that means anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that I distinguish the way I'm kind of looking at this ranking is not necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily the same way you are in like player for player.
Yeah.
As it's just team for team and the way I remember the team. So in third place, I have that 18-19 City team.
Okay, they're pretty close.
Because of the Sane. It was Sterling at his peak. Aguero was still firing. I remember that Vincent Kompany goal against Leicester. I remember that brilliant game against Liverpool with the goal line clearance that won them the league. Essentially, in retrospect, it was John Stones clearing it off the line. This was the team following the team I have, who we'll get to later on, continuing that blistering pace with a team behind them, with Liverpool behind them, because that year they first won it, they just blew everyone away. This year, Liverpool was with them every step of the way, and they still were magnificent. And I do want to touch on a point you made. I just think these teams were a bit more gung-ho.
Yeah,
and
they were.
I remember being, like I said, being wowed by them. Whereas nowadays with Pep, I'm not wowed by Man City. I'm like, yeah, they're really good, and they're really their games are really boring because they just dominate you, right? So it's kind of the rankings are perspective based, I think. So I had that 18-19 City team in third.
Yeah, I had Klopp's Liverpool in third, just ahead of this team. Why? Well, they got one more point, maybe, but again, I think that Liverpool team, you talk about dominating. Yeah. They won the league in January. I mean, they were invincible until Watford beat them.
Yep, I remember that.
Whatever, the latter half of that season. I mean, that team was absurd. Trent got 13 assists from right back. I mean, it was nuts. Salah got 19 goals. Mane got 18 goals. Firmino got 9. That front three, that was the best sort of season of them, obviously. And they deserved to get over the line. They finally did. And the manner in which they did was quite something, the way they dominated the league that season. Again, 99 points is pretty insane. 2.61 points per game. That's just a monstrous total. Why are they not higher? 33 goals conceded, really, is the only sort of argument. Again, I sort of did it slightly different to you. I'm sort of comparing squad for squad. Are Van Dijk and Joe Gomez the best partnership on the list? Maybe not. But the way they dominated the Premier League that season is quite something. That was a special team.
Yeah, I have them in second. They're my second place team. I think it's unfortunate for Liverpool fans that after coming so close so multiple times, the one they won it was the COVID one where they had to celebrate in an empty stadium. And I'm sure Liverpool fans will still appreciate the memories they had up until March time. It's also, I think, important to note that this team won the league immediately after they won the Champions League. They won the Champions League in the spring of that 2019. I think they won the Super Cup. I remember against Chelsea. I think, that was when Lampard was the coach there. And like you said, they were just magnificent. And this is a key thing. So we're going through all these teams, and we have different ways to kind of demark them. This team was I just remember their kit. I remember the lines going down their kit. I remember when it was their last year with New Balance. I could just envision Trent. I remember the beautiful goal he scored at Leicester. He kind of let it come to him and struck it with the outside of his foot. And they deserved the league. This team, deserves a lot more than they got. Multiple times missing out by a point. But this was, I think, the best version of, like you said, Mane, Salah, Firmino, Van Dijk at his best. Henderson was still really good. It was Robertson and Trent at their best, and Klopp in full force. And like you said, they won it at a canter. I think the history books won't really look at it the same way or maybe the history books will be kind because they'll just look at the points total, whereas our memories are like they got so far ahead and then the league stopped. And then they kind of finished it off. It was untraditional in that sense, but they were magnificent. They're only behind the one team I have in first.
Yeah,
who did you have
which must
second?
be the Centurions, because that's who
correct.
I have in second. What a team, 100 points. I think this is the team I enjoy watching the most on this list. And listen, they weren't leaking goals either. 27 goals conceded is not many. I don't think it's the best defense. That's probably what differentiated them from who I have top. With Otamendi, Fabian Delph, Walker, Danilo, Stones and company still there, obviously. But Yaya Toure was still around. It was De Bruyne. It was Bernardo Silva. It was Fernandinho in his prime. It was David Silva, and it was Jesus and Aguero who got 13 goals and 21 goals respectively. But the Sané Sterling, this is like the Sané Sterling season for me. Like they were electric to watch, especially Leroy Sané, man, on the wing. He was just a cheat code. I like those sort of traditional pacey wingers. So that was just so fun to watch, and the Aguero swan song, of course, he's a player that I just love, and they have the highest points total of any Premier League team in history, so that has to count for something.
Yeah, that's my number one team, the Centurions, and I think after going through this list, and you said it just then, this was maybe your favorite team to watch. That's kind of how I've ranked this, and how, like I said, how this team's made me feel watching them. And I'm not a fan of any of these teams, but it's just from a neutral perspective. Leroy Sané was one of my favorite players to watch pre-ACL injury.
Yeah.
I don't think he's ever been the same. I don't think Raheem Sterling has really reached the levels that he reached at this season. I think it was the best Raheem Sterling you got. It was Aguero still in his pomp. You still had Fernandinho and company, like you said, but there was still David Silva popping up. I mean, they were just relentless, and it was great to see Pep conquer the Premier League at a time where it wasn't boring for him to do so. Because now it's a bit boring. It's a bit like we know how good he is. Whereas at the time, if you remember in 2016-17, they struggled a bit. They got
his
top
first
four.
season.
His first season was a struggle. And so it was like, okay, here's Pep. Here's this greatest manager ever. But can he do it in the Premier League? And he shut everybody up, and they were brilliant to watch. They were a magnificent team, and they did it in an entertaining way. I think even now, looking back, there's less disdain I have for those Man City's teams compared to these newer ones because of the way they went about their business and the way they just scored so many goals, and they were fun with Jesus and all these guys in attack. So they're my number one. So I think that leaves
the treble winners for me. And listen, not the best Man City team to watch, but for me, maybe the most well-rounded City team. Haaland is really the difference here with 36 goals he got that season. I mean, are you kidding me? Alvarez was there with 9. Gundogan was still there before he left. Rodri, of course. De Bruyne, even though he was injured, was still fantastic. He got 16 assists. He missed like 2/3 of the season. It was unreal. It was just a cheat code. And again, it's not my favorite City team. But my take on this was, who would win if the two faced off? And this team, they couldn't lose a game. They were on a mission that season, and they just could not be stopped. They were an absolute machine. Defensively, they were, I think, probably the best they've been with that sort of the way Pep tweaked it to have just out-and-out center backs, Stone stepping into midfield, Ake, Diaz, Walker, Akanji behind him. So solid, so hard to beat they were that season. I think they were harder to beat than maybe the teams that are a bit more free-flowing, a bit more early pep, a bit more fun to watch. So, and of course you've got, Foden, Grealish, Mahrez in attack. Just brilliant. They had the quality, but they had the robustness. They had the physicality that they maybe hadn't had, and that got them over the line in the Champions League. It only got them 89 points in the Premier League, but still, I think to win on three fronts is quite an achievement. And the way they did it, like I said, not the sexiest team of all time in the Premier League, but boy, what a team that was. And Erling Haaland, man, I think he's going to go down as with Henry. I think is the best Premier League striker forward we will have ever seen. He's that clinical in front of goal.
Yeah, I know I had this team a bit lower, but you can't really argue with any of that. And I think the way you kind of constructed your list makes sense that this team is at the forefront.
Yeah.
All right, that will do it for our rankings. I mean, a lot of Man City. We're hoping the next 10 years, a bit more parity, hopefully, a bit more split.